Have you ever sat in a classroom and looked around you? Think about it for a moment. The desks, the books, the teacher standing at the front of the room. Now ask yourself a simple question. Was this classroom always meant only for people like you? For most of human history, the answer was yes. Education was local. It was small, and for many people, it was completely out of reach. Today, we live in a world where a student in Vietnam can study with a professor in Canada. A teenager in Nigeria can attend an online class taught in Australia. A child in a small village can dream of Harvard, Oxford, or Tokyo University. But this world did not appear overnight. The global classroom was not born easily. It was built slowly, with struggle, hope, and courage. To understand how far we have come, we must first go back to a time when learning had borders. Education before the world was connected. Long ago, education was not a right. It was a privilege. In ancient times, knowledge belonged to a very small group of people. Priests, scholars, the wealthy. If you were born into the wrong family or the wrong place, your future was already decided. Schools did not welcome everyone. Most people learned only what their parents could teach them. A farmer's child learned farming. A blacksmith's child learned metal. A fisherman's child learned the sea. Books were rare. Paper was expensive. Teachers were few. Education did not travel far. When knowledge had borders, imagine Europe hundreds of years ago. Universities existed, yes, but they were isolated islands. If you wanted to study at a famous university, you had to physically travel there. There was no internet, no online lectures, no recorded lessons. Travel was dangerous, slow, and expensive. Only the bravest or the richest could cross borders to learn. Most people stayed where they were born. Their minds never crossed oceans, even if their dreams did. Education stayed locked behind walls. Language, the first great barrier. Even if you managed to reach another country, another wall waited for you. Language. Latin once ruled education in Europe. Later, it was replaced by national languages. If you didn't speak the language of instruction, you were invisible. You could be intelligent, curious, eager to learn, but without the right language, no one could hear your voice. Knowledge existed, but it wasn't shared equally. The industrial age changes everything. Then, something powerful happened. The world began to move. Factories appeared. Cities grew. Machines replaced hands. The Industrial Revolution did more than change work. It changed education. Governments realized something important. A modern nation needed educated people. Workers had to read instructions. Engineers had to understand science. Doctors had to study medicine. Slowly, schools began to open to more people. Public education was born, but still it was national, not global. Each country built its own system, its own rules, its own standards. A diploma in one country often meant nothing in another. The classroom had grown, but it still had walls. The 20th century, a world on the move. Then came the 20th century. Wars changed borders. Technology shrank distances. Airplanes made the world feel smaller. People began to move not just for survival, but for opportunity. Students crossed borders to study. Scientists traveled to share ideas. Doctors trained abroad. For the first time, education began to move with people. But there was a problem. No one agreed on what education meant. Imagine this. A student from one country arrives at a university in another country. They say, "I studied for 4 years. I am ready." But the university asks, ready for what? Are their textbooks the same? Is their level the same? Can they understand lectures? Can they write academic papers? There was no common language of trust. Degrees were questioned. Certificates were doubt. Students were tested again and again. Education crossed borders, but trust did not. English enters the classroom. As the world became more connected, one language began to rise. English. It became the language of science, the language of business, the language of international education. Universities began teaching in English to attract global students. Research papers were published in English. Global conferences spoke English. This opened doors, but it also created new challenges. What about students who were intelligent but not fluent? What about countries where English was not spoken at home? The world wanted one classroom, but not everyone had the same key. The birth of a new dream. Educators around the world began asking big questions. How do we teach students from different cultures? How do we measure learning fairly? How do we make education truly global? They realized something important. Education was no longer just about knowledge. It was about access. The future would belong to those who could learn anywhere, anytime, from anyone. The idea of the global classroom was born. Not a building, not a country, but a shared space of learning. The first cracks in the walls. Exchange programs appeared. Scholarships crossed borders. International universities opened branch campuses. Slowly, the walls began to crack. A student in Asia could study in Europe. A professor in America could teach in the Middle East. Ideas began to flow, but still, only a small number of people could join. The classroom was opening, but it was not yet global. A question that changed everything. Then, one quiet question changed the future. What if education didn't depend on location at all? What if learning could travel faster than people? At the time, it sounded impossible. But technology was waiting, and it was about to change everything. We asked a question that once sounded impossible. What if education did not depend on location? For centuries, learning had a fixed address. A building, a classroom, a city. If you were not there, you were not learning. But quietly, almost unnoticed at first, technology began to loosen the chains. The global classroom was about to take its first real breath. The age of paper and chalk. Before screens and keyboards, education lived on paper. Heavy books filled with small text. Chalkboards covered in white dust. Teachers speaking while students copied every word by hand. Knowledge moved slowly. If a new discovery was made, it could take years to reach another country. Libraries were the internet of their time, but only if you could enter them. For millions of people, education was still far away. The first educational machines. In the mid-20th century, something strange appeared in classrooms. Machines, projectors, tape recorders, language labs with headphones and microphones. These tools did not replace teachers, but they changed how students experienced learning. For the first time, students could hear voices from far away. They could listen to recorded lectures. They could practice pronunciation without leaving the room. Education was still local, but it was starting to reach outward. The television classroom. Then came television. This was revolutionary. Governments and universities realized that one teacher could now reach thousands of students at the same time. Educational programs appeared on TV. Distance learning began through broadcast lessons. A child in a rural village could watch the same lesson as a student in a big city. It wasn't interactive. You couldn't ask questions. But something important had changed. Learning was no longer limited to one room. The walls were weakening. The computer enters the classroom. In the 1980s and 1990s, computers arrived. At first, they were expensive and rare. Only a few schools had them. Students learned basic typing, simple programs, early educational software. But computers brought a powerful idea. Information could be stored, copied, and shared instantly. A lesson could live inside a machine. The classroom began to stretch beyond school hours. Then came the internet. Quietly, slowly. At first, few people understood its power. Emails replaced letters. Websites replaced encyclopedias. Search engines replaced long library visits. And education changed forever. Suddenly, knowledge had no borders. A student no longer had to wait for a book. They could search for answers in seconds. Universities began uploading materials online. Professors shared notes. Students collaborated across countries. The global classroom was no longer a dream. It was becoming real. Email, forums, and the first online students. Early online education was simple. Email conversations with teachers, discussion forums with classmates from different countries. assignments sent digitally. It was slow, sometimes confusing, but it worked. For the first time, students could study without moving. A working mother, a full-time employee, a student in a remote village. Education began to adapt to people's lives, not the other way around. Universities go digital. By the early 2000s, universities saw the future clearly. They built learning platforms. They offered distance degrees. They created virtual classrooms. A student could be registered at a university thousands of kilometers away. Time zones no longer mattered. Borders mattered less. Education was no longer tied to geography. The birth of the online global student, a new kind of student appeared. They studied at night. They watched recorded lectures. They discussed ideas with classmates they would never meet in person. Their classroom was a screen. Their library was the internet. Their classmates were the world. The global classroom had found its people. MOCS. Education for the masses. Then came a bold idea. What if the best universities in the world shared their courses for free? This idea gave birth to MOSEs, massive open online courses. Suddenly, anyone could learn from top professors. Anyone could study computer science, history, or medicine basics. Millions of learners joined. Some were curious. Some were desperate for opportunity. Some were simply hungry to learn. Education became more democratic than ever before. But with opportunity came new challenges. If everyone could learn online, how do we measure quality? How do we know what someone really knows? How do we keep education meaningful, not shallow? The global classroom was growing fast, and it needed structure. Language returns as a key issue. Even in this digital world, one thing remained critical. Language. Most global education was in English. Students needed more than basic English. They needed academic English, professional English. They needed to listen, read, write, and speak confidently. The same old wall returned, but now more people were trying to climb it. Human connection in a digital world. Another problem appeared. Education was becoming efficient, but also lonely. Students missed discussion. They missed human interaction. They missed real conversations. Educators realized something important. Technology could deliver knowledge, but humans give learning meaning. The global classroom needed both. The door is open, but not fully. By the end of this era, something was clear. The door to the global classroom was open, but not everyone could walk through it easily. Access depended on technology, language, recognition, trust. The world had built the road, but not everyone had a map, and that would lead to the next great transformation. The global classroom had grown quickly, too quickly, some said. What began as a hopeful idea had now become a massive system, touching millions of lives across continents. But growth always brings questions. And with questions come challenges. The world had opened the classroom door. Now it had to learn how to keep it fair, human, and strong. The weight of inequality. The first challenge was impossible to ignore. Not everyone had the same access. In some homes, students studied on powerful laptops with fast internet, and others, a single mobile phone was shared between siblings. The global classroom promised opportunity, but opportunities still depended on where you were born. A student in a big city could attend live online lectures. A student in a rural area waited for weak signals and frozen screens. The world was connected, but unevenly. Educators around the globe began to ask a difficult question. How global is global if millions are left behind? The cost of education in a borderless world. Another issue emerged, quietly. Money. International education had always been expensive. Tuition fees. Living costs. Application fees. Online education reduced some costs, but not all. Certificates still required payment. Degrees still carried price tags. The global classroom was open, but not always affordable. Governments, universities, and organizations faced a moral decision. Was education a product or a responsibility? Then came a deeper concern. Trust. If a student studied online, how could institutions be sure? Who completed the work? Who took the exam? Who earned the degree? Technology brought opportunity, but also risk. Cheating became easier. Fake certificates appeared. Diplomas were questioned. To protect the global classroom, new systems were built. Identity verification, online proctoring, secure assessments. Education had to protect its credibility, because without trust, learning loses its value. The human cost of digital learning, but not all challenges were technical. Some were emotional. Students reported feeling isolated, disconnected, invisible. They passed courses, but missed conversation. They earned degrees, but missed community. Educators realized something essential. Learning is not just information transfer. It is a human experience. The global classroom had to bring people together, not push them apart. Blended learning, the best of both worlds. In response, a new model appeared. Blended learning, part online, part in person. Technology delivered content. Humans delivered connection. Students watched lectures online, then discussed ideas face. The classroom became flexible, personal, alive again. This model spread across schools and universities. The global classroom learned how to breathe. The pandemic, a turning point. Then, suddenly, the world stopped. A global pandemic closed schools in almost every country. Classrooms went dark. Campuses emptied. Silence replaced lectures, but education did not stop. The global classroom was tested, and it survived. Teachers learned new tools overnight. Students adapted quickly. Entire education systems moved online in weeks. What once seemed optional became essential. The future arrived faster than anyone expected. A new respect for teachers and learners. This moment changed how the world saw education. Teachers became innovators. Students became resilient. Families saw how hard learning truly is. Society understood the value of education more deeply. The global classroom was no longer a luxury. It was a lifeline. Artificial intelligence enters the classroom. As the world recovered, a new force entered education. Artificial intelligence. AI began grading assignments, recommending lessons, adapting content to individual learners. For the first time, education could be personal at scale. A student who struggled received more support. A student who excelled moved faster. Learning became smarter. But again, a question appeared. How do we use machines without losing the human heart? The future. A classroom without limits. Looking ahead, the global classroom continues to evolve. Imagine a world where lessons adapt to your pace. Language barriers fade with real-time translation. Credentials are recognized globally. Education follows you throughout your life. This future is not far away. The classroom will not be one place. It will be everywhere. In homes, on phones, across borders. What the global classroom truly means. At its core, the global classroom is not about technology. It is about belief. The belief that talent exists everywhere. Opportunity should too. Learning should not depend on geography. It is about giving every learner a voice, a final reflection. Think about the students of the future. They will study with classmates from different cultures. They will solve global problems together. They will understand the world, because they learned in it. The classroom has grown beyond walls, and in doing so, it has brought humanity closer together.